I've lived in the UK for 46 years. I come from a Zionist family. I lived in Israel for 4 years. I was bar mitzvahed in Israel, and it was just an integral part of my understanding of the world that Israel was an essential response to the Holocaust. My mother is a Holocaust survivor. Most of her family, our family, was murdered in Auschwitz. And up until my late teens, that was just taken for granted. When I say I came from a Zionist family, that came both from my father's work from the end of the war, when he was involved in helping displaced people, survivors of the Holocaust, even though it wasn't called the Holocaust then, and working for the rest of his life for the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee, which helped refugees and Jewish communities around the world, including Israel, where we lived for 4 years up until 1966. It was always taken for granted at home that Israel had to exist, and it was right to exist, and was the final place where Jews, when anti-Semitism rose up again, as somehow we felt inevitably it would or could, where Jews could be safe. What happened then to my view of Israel and Zionism was that it altered strongly in my 20s, after the Six-Day War and after the Yom Kippur War, because I became more and more aware, mostly through reading and talking to friends, that what I had completely missed as a child and what really wasn't discussed at home was the impact of the creation of the State of Israel and then the occupation of the West Bank, the Golan Heights, Sinai and Gaza on Palestinians and on people who had been living in Palestine before the, if you like, mass migration of Jews, particularly after the war, and what had happened to that society and that culture and that population, both in 1948, but then also after the Six-Day War, after 1967. And as I say, initially that was just through reading. I mean, it was reading people like the poet Mahmoud Darwish, who's an incredible Palestinian poet who wrote about the Nakba and the impact of the creation of the State of Israel, which I'd always experienced, certainly as a child, as an unvarnished good. The other side of that. I read actually Israeli historians like Ilan Pape, who investigated what had happened before 48, in 48, and then looking at the impact of the occupation. Also by Israeli writers like David Grossman and Amos Oz, who were able to capture the injustice, particularly of the occupation, through an Israeli lens. And this other story emerged of a people who were victims, who were victims of, if you like, the victims, because I grew up with a sense of persecution, not personal persecution. I've lived a privileged and unpersecuted life, but the persecution of my family and the destruction of a lot of my family. So that was a very hard kind of realization, and that stayed with me since my 20s. I've now lived in the UK for 46 years. I would say for a lot of the time that I've lived here, that has been part of my consciousness. But up until relatively recently, I really didn't do anything with that realization that the Palestinians had been persecuted, other than going on demonstrations, signing petitions, reading more. And then I had the opportunity about 6 years ago of doing something concrete out of a sense of solidarity with Palestinians. There are many peoples around the world who we, when I say we, I mean us privileged people living in the global north, can support and give solidarity to and put some of our energy into working with. so then the question is, why the Palestinians? And the thing that drew me to the Palestinians was my own family history of Zionism. So that's, it kind of made sense to me. There is in Palestine no family medicine. I am a family doctor, I'm a GP, and I'm an academic in primary care. There's no good system of family medicine in Palestine. There's developed primary care, but not this specialty of general practice of family medicine. And I had the opportunity of working with a remarkable woman, Samar Musmar, who's a Palestinian family doctor, the first academic family physician who trained in Florida and then came back to Nablus, which was her city of origin, to set up a program of training for family medicine. And she needed support to do that from family doctors around the world, if you like. But a group of us in Britain came forward and said, we'd like to support you in doing that. And the interesting aspect of that is most of us are Jewish. So this connection I feel, and if you like, impulse for solidarity is not unique to me. I mean, it is also something that's shared by other Jewish, GPs in this case. The work in Palestine has burgeoned because I'm a researcher and I'm particularly interested in domestic violence. I managed to find collaborations with public health and primary care researchers who wanted to do research on domestic violence in Palestine, and we now have a project there. And we're trying to extend the link with a university in Palestine. It's called An-Najah. It's one of the biggest universities in Palestine. And it's built up this collegial relationship with Palestinians. And of course, out of those relationships come friendships as well. And what has happened to me in the last 5 or 6 years is a kind of transformation of my understanding of what's going on, from a kind of, if you like, political and book-based understanding to a human understanding with friends and colleagues, which has only strengthened my sense of the injustice that is being visited on Palestinian people. Working with Palestinians and then visiting Palestine, several times, transformed my relationship and I guess my understanding of what the Palestinian experience was. And it moved from a theoretical, book-based, political understanding to a human understanding through the colleagueship and friendship with Palestinians. And it deepened my sense and understanding of the injustice of being occupied, and being occupied without an end in sight. And therefore, as a Jew, it has allowed me to understand the perspective of the people who are the other in this. And I think it's been easier for me since those relationships have developed. When I say my people, it's because I still, as a Jew, identify with Israel strongly. I have very dear cousins and friends, in fact, several cousins who live in Israel and who I visit when I go and work in Palestine. So I feel that connection, but it strengthened that, that, if you like, the sense of being compelled to speak out about the injustice. And I think, Jews for Justice is an organization that does what it says on the tin. It's about striving for justice. What that justice will look like, the whole political question about a two-state solution, a one-state solution, is definitely beyond any sense of certainty that I have about what needs doing. My certainty is about the need to work together with Palestinians and to really try and understand the perception of people living under occupation. And I'm thinking now about the Palestinians in the West Bank. I know that Israel no longer formally occupies Gaza, but it controls Gaza. Gaza has become like a ghetto, and I use that term completely advisedly. And I have under no illusions what ghetto means, because my family was herded into a ghetto. Speaking now to other Jews in Britain, it's not easy within our culture or within our society, within Jewish society, to speak out strongly in favor of Palestinians and their rights. It's not easy. And yet I think we owe it to our own tradition of fairness and justice to do that. And we shouldn't be afraid of the criticism we get if there's this easy confusion, and systematic confusion actually, between anti-Semitism and being pro-Palestinian. I'm pro-Palestinian in terms of wanting Palestinians to have equal rights, and I think we may be moving towards a civil rights phase of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And I certainly am not an anti-Semite. I'm proud to be a Jew. It's integral to my identity. Part of that identity is feeling a close solidarity with Palestinians. Turning to Jews in the UK, to other Jews in the UK, this question about how they should, how we can perceive what's going on, I would like to make a strong pitch for really trying to understand the experience of Palestinians. And one may have to do that mostly through reading, but one can also do it by hearing Palestinians speak in the UK and also, through the web about their experience. It's very difficult to hold on to a view that excludes their experience if you're really listening to what's going on and finding ways of speaking out against it. Because I think we do have a responsibility to speak out against the injustice that's still being perpetrated against this population. My solidarity with Palestinians and my wanting to speak out around their injustice, which is based on this friendship and colleagueship with Palestinians, is to me integral to my Jewish identity. Because that identity, which is as strong as it's ever been, is very much based around principles of justice and fairness and not oppressing people, because we have been oppressed for millennia. And, that it's so much part of our consciousness that, that we've had to resist oppression. So the reality that and I'm connecting myself to Israel here, in the way that Israel connects itself to me as a Jew, the idea that we are oppressors is actually, it's intolerable, and therefore we have a responsibility to speak out.